it away.
All right, thanks everybody for joining for this third webinar series, how to use the Azure Cost Estimator. I'm going to take some slides from a previous presentation I did about how to make money selling Azure, and we'll kind of build into the calculator there, right? So again, my name is Tony Kai. I'm the Partner Sales Executive here at Nerdio, and today we're going to really talk about understanding, Azure reservations and Azure hybrid use, and then finally walking through a real opportunity using the Nerdio Cost Estimator. All right, so some of the challenges that MSPs tell us that they face every day when they talk about wanting to sell Azure is that, off the bat, it seems pretty expensive to sell Azure, right? If you use the Azure calculator directly, some of you guys might be surprised about how much Azure may cost, and find no way to kind of make any margins for yourself, and find it hard to sell your customer at such a high price, right? What we hear a lot is also it's complex, right? Azure's technology is complex, and that's really where Nerdio can help as well. And then the third thing is that it's risky, right? We're all used to selling on-prem hardware for the last 15, 20 years. All of a sudden, we're moving to this cloud consumption model. So the risk is if you misquoting correctly or pricing correctly, that you'd be forced to have to go back to the customer and ask them for more money, or worse, eat into your own margins, right? So some of the things that we're afraid of when we're talking about Azure, we're going to have a solution for here today. So the first thing we're going to jump right into is, I want you to understand that a price in Azure for a virtual machine could be seen could be looked at in two parts, or two ways, right? So let's say you have a D8 SV3 virtual machine in Azure. That's 75 cents per hour. Well, part of that 75 cents per hour pays for the actual hardware that goes into the Azure data center to give you that compute power, right? And the other part of that 75 cents per hour pays for the actual Windows Server operating system, right? So those two components, the hardware and the software, are included in the pay-as-you-go price inside of a Azure virtual machine, right? So with that knowledge, we'll be able to move ahead. So don't forget that one part pays for the hardware, one part pays for the software, which makes up the per hour price of a virtual machine in Azure, right? So we're going to talk about how to really make some margins, right? So first, we want to become a CSP, which I believe most everybody on this call is already either a direct CSP from Microsoft or buying through a distributor, a tier 2 CSP like Synnex, Ingram, Tech Data, Pax8, SureWeb, those guys. All right. The second thing you want to learn about, which we'll talk about a lot today, is Azure reservations, and then the third thing is leveraging Azure hybrid use, right? Azure hybrid benefits. So what is a CSP? A CSP allows you guys to sell Azure and make some margins, right? So for Azure, you can make up to 15% margin. For Office 365, you can make up to 20% margin. There's additional accelerators and Azure rebates that Microsoft has every quarter that can help you leverage and make use of those funds to help you sell Azure and drive your costs down. And then there's additional programs that Microsoft has, such as the DCO program or data center cost optimization, which Microsoft's team will basically work with you. You have a data center you want to move into Azure. So just be aware of these programs, and as you work through your opportunities, feel free to leverage Microsoft for additional rebates or incentives. So what is an Azure reservation, right? So when you buy a virtual machine, you're paying something as pay-as-you-go, right? And Microsoft will give you a huge discount, somewhere between 20 and 57% on each VM, if you tell them that you're going to commit to using something for 12 or 36 months, right? So essentially what you're doing is getting into a 3-year agreement or 1-year agreement with Microsoft, and in return, they give you a big discount for doing so, right? So you can get into these agreements and yet still pay month to month. There is a small penalty fee of 12% of what's left of the agreement if you do choose to cancel earlier before your penalty. But that cancellation fee likely is very low, and the reward is very high when you do these 3-year commitments. All right, so that reservations is basically telling Microsoft you're going to commit to using their hardware for 1 or 3 years, and in result they give you a discount, right? So remember that chart we showed about before, where we looked at the compute and the software. So this Azure reservation saves you money on the hardware side of that equation. Right, and then the next thing is called Azure Hybrid Usage Benefits, or Azure Hybrid Benefits, and that basically is prepaying upfront for licensing, right? So you guys are familiar with purchasing on-prem licensing using open license. Like whenever you spin up a new virtual machine, you go and buy open license from Microsoft. So it's the same idea. So instead of renting the license from Microsoft, right? Remember the graph I showed you, where the other half of that paying that 75 cents per hour deals with the software. So instead of renting the software on an hourly basis from Microsoft, you can purchase that license up front and thereby taking advantage of Azure Hybrid benefits or Azure Hybrid use benefits, right? So by purchasing a license up front, you're stopping the meter for the operating system. And in addition, you can save up to 10 to 49% on top of the reserve instance discount when you purchase licenses. So I just want to show you those are the two biggest levers that you can take advantage of to save you the most money in Azure, right? And then when you're quoting, virtual machines in Azure, you want to understand what these VM families mean, right? So you have, there's many different VM families in Azure, but there's typically only 5 or 6 that you need to know about, and those are the 5 or 6 that you're going to use, 100% of the time, right? We're not going to use some of the larger virtual machines because they're not made for workloads that MSPs typically see. So you have your B series machines. They're best used for light workloads where CPUs average under 40%, right? So best used for domain controllers or small file servers that are maybe under 20 users, light workloads. You have your D series machines, which are your standard virtual machines, right? They start at 2-core, 8 gig of RAM. They double up every time you go up. Then you have your E series machines, which are basically your standard machines, but with extra memory, right? So you get double the memory and only pay 15% more for the same size CPU equivalent of the D series machine. So what does that mean? So let's say you have a 2-core 8 gig of RAM machine, right? For let's say $38 a month. You can get a 2-core 16 gig of RAM machine for just 15% more money than that, right? So you have to kind of look at your workloads and determine, does my application need more memory, or does my application require more CPU, right? So if I need more CPU, then I'm looking at my F series. So your F series are your standard virtual machines with extra CPU over memory ratio. Again, it's cheaper than doubling up in your D series when you only need CPU. So for example, you have a 4-core 8 gig of RAM machine, which is more heavily optimized for CPU there. And then lastly, we have your N series machines, right? So these are GPU enabled machines for 3D CAD workloads. The NVIDIA's got the Tesla 60 card. AMD just came out with the new one. These are for your applications like AutoCAD, Revit, and things like SolidWorks. So I'm actually going to spend 5 minutes in the actual Azure calculator before we use the Nerdio calculator, and just explain the concept of a reserve instance and Azure Hybrid use for you guys. All right, so I'm actually going to go to the Azure calculator, and we're going to select a region. We'll pick US East. And we'll look at a D8 SV3 machine, right? So a D8 SV3 machine running 24 hours a day for an entire month, which is 730 hours, costs you $548 per month, right? So $548 per month is quite expensive for an 8-core 32 gig of RAM, right? So you can probably buy hardware for that, and at this rate, you'd pay for it in no time, which is why most people think Azure is expensive, right? But when you take advantage of the 3-year reserved instances, that price goes down to $376, right, per month, which is a big savings. Now, let's take it a bit further. Remember that chart I showed you where you have the compute side and the software side, where you're going to purchase a Windows Server license for MSRP about $582 in US and get an additional $268 per month discount off of that. So if you take advantage of both, which is what we're telling you to do, an 8-core 32 gig of RAM machine that used to be $548 is now only $107 per month. Right, so now that's a big difference, right? If you take this principle and you apply it across all your virtual machines inside a given customer, let's say you have a domain controller, a file server, a Windows Virtual Desktop session host, all taking advantage of 3-year reserve instances and Azure Hybrid benefits, you're looking at upwards of an 80% discount from your Azure bill, right? So that's just an important thing to know before we jump into the Nerdio Azure calculator. So let's actually head over to the Nerdio admin portal, which is at app.nerdio.net. For you guys that want to use this, just head over to getnerdio.com, and you'll be able to access the Azure Cost Estimator or sign up for a free trial of Nerdio and use the calculator at your own convenience. So once you log in to the Nerdio admin portal, the first thing you're going to do is head over to billing, and hit the NFA Cost Estimator, Nerdio for Azure Cost Estimator. So this is a little utility which Nerdio has built to kind of help managed service providers quote Azure in a much more efficient way, right? So some of the challenges of the Azure Estimator itself, right, the Microsoft one, is that it's a great tool. I use it all the time for references, but it's hard to determine what you need and what you use, right? So basically, there's times when you go through a calculator and say to yourself, "Wow, boy, this is expensive," or "Hey, I wonder if I'm missing something that would surprise me when I go and deploy something like this," right? So there's always that inkling feeling that you might have missed something or that something isn't right. Well, that's why we created the Nerdio Cost Estimator to help you figure all those things out, right? We give you a series of questions that you answer. And if you answer them correctly, we'll give you an exact cost per user per month for a given workload, right? And we have workloads such as just simple infrastructure as a service or desktop as a service, or what we call IT as a service, which is the whole entire thing moved to the cloud, right? So let's say you had a customer that wanted to move their on-prem environment from their IT closets to Azure. You have to consider, moving their domain controllers, their file servers, the line of business application servers, their backup, their disaster recovery, perhaps even their virtual desktops, all running in the cloud for a per set monthly cost. That's where we're able to help you calculate here in Nerdio. So let's use the next 10, 15 minutes to kind of go over a typical deployment for a customer that is managed by a MSP, right? So we're going to pick IT as a service in this scenario, where we're going to, again, take everything from the closet, the IT closet at the company site, and move that into Azure, and with that, also move Windows Virtual Desktop workloads as well, right? So from a network diagram perspective, this is essentially what we're looking to build, right? Let me show you this. So you have a environment in Azure where you have a domain controller, a file server, some optional line of business application servers, and a virtual desktop session host, all sitting in one VNet or one region. Right, so we're going to go back to IT as a service, and let's say we have a customer of 50 users that want to move to the cloud, right? So how many overall desktops will be used? Let's say 50 people need virtual desktops. Which type of experience will you offer, right? So you can still choose RDS or the new WVD. We'll stick with the new Windows Virtual Desktop. And then this third question is asking, well, how many people need dedicated desktops, right? So let's say out of the 50 people, there's 2 partners that you may want to separate out and give them virtual desktops. So we'll put 2 in here. And how many users will use graphic intensive needs in this situation? So let's just say none, because they aren't a engineering firm, right? Maybe they're a law firm. So you come down to the step 3, which is the server section, and you start specifying the sizes and disk properties for each server, right? So for Windows Virtual Desktop workloads, you still need a domain controller. So for 50 users, I'll use a 2-core 8 GB RAM domain controller. And the reason why I'm picking a B series is because the B series are used for light workloads, right? So this domain controller, most of the time, is going to be under 40% utilization. So we'll leave it at a B series 2-core 8 GB RAM machine. Now for file server, let's actually pick something higher. So let's do a D4 SV3. That's going to give me 4-core 16 gigs of RAM for their file server, because I plan to give them 1 terabyte of space, right? So let's give it a terabyte of premium SSD for all their file storage and for their FSLogix profiles, right? And the next line down, we have an ADFS proxy server. Well, I don't think this client's going to need it, so we'll just go ahead and delete that. But they'll need a app server, right? So let's say they have an app server for application called ProLaw, and that ProLaw application, again, needs a 4-core 16 gig of RAM machine, and maybe the application itself has some data in it, and they use 512 gigs of data, right? So essentially here, you can just pretty much add whatever servers you need, pick the right size, pick the right disk type, and you move on to the next section, right? So section 4 basically asks, what type of Office 365 licenses are they currently using, right? So to license Windows Virtual Desktop, you actually need a Microsoft 365 Business Premium or above. And let's just, for the sake of pretending that this customer doesn't have Office 365 yet, right? Let's say you're just coming from Gmail or G Suite. So here we're going to calculate the cost of 50 M365 licenses, right? So you type in the number here, and Nerdio calculates that price on the side over here. So you can see in real time what the cost of this solution is going to become, right? So will you need Windows 10 enterprise licenses for Windows Virtual Desktop? The answer is no, because the Microsoft 365 business license already comes with it. So I'll just keep saying that the customer already has it. So we'll move on. And then step 5, we have that question we talked about before, right? Do you intend to use Azure Hybrid Use Benefits, right? So we saw before that you get up to a 49% discount on doing so. So we're going to actually say yes. So pay attention to this number when you say yes to this, right? So when you say yes to that, it actually knocks the price down to $43 per user per month by just doing so. And again, reserved instances, my advice is always to do a 3-year reserved instance, because that's the big difference, right? So you're looking at paying $54 per user per month down to $43 by taking advantage of 3-year reserved instances and Azure Hybrid benefits, right? And over the course of 50 users in the course of 3 years, that's a big significant difference. So next question down is, do you want to use in-region backup, right? So Azure backup in region means 99.119 of SLA availability. 3 copies of your data gets sent to the same region in opposite sides of each other. So unless something largely catastrophic happens, your data is safe, right? And if that's not enough, if you have a compliance reason, some people might opt in for out-of-region disaster recovery, right? So we'll create another disaster region, use GRS backup, and replicate your data to 3 other regions, right? So you can see the cost of that by selecting yes or no, right? So in this instance, we'll just say no. Next one down is, does your customer use site-to-site VPN? Let's just say that would be a good idea. This customer might want a site-to-site VPN, so you say yes to that. Next question down is called Hybrid AD, right? So Nerdio has an automation that allows you to bring your on-premise domain controller into Azure and extend that Active Directory into Microsoft Azure, right? So helps with easy migration, helps with lift and shift operations, where you can take a domain controller as is and a lot of line of business application servers on-premise and simply lift and shift them into Azure by using Hybrid AD. So in this scenario, we'll just say no. We're going to create a greenfield environment. Will you use desktop auto-scaling as a feature? Well, you'll notice that this is actually disabled because we're going to commit to using 3-year reserve instances on all the machines, right? So when you're using something for 3 years and committed to something for 3 years, Microsoft doesn't care whether you turn that machine on or off, right? So because you have that turned on for reserve instances, we're actually telling you just leave everything on 24/7. Next one down, we have something called the on-ramp region. So an on-ramp region is basically Nerdio's technology that allows you to create new VNets in different regions, and allows customers from other regions connect into your primary region or primary VNet, right? So let's say you had a customer in New York that had multiple offices around the world. You might say yes to that and specify how many additional regions you want, and Nerdio will calculate the cost of data transferring in and out of those regions when you're doing that. So next thing down here is we're going to actually talk about our pooled desktops, right? So let's say you're using Windows Virtual Desktop pools, and we're going to actually select each session host to be, let's say, an E8 SV3, which is an 8-core 64 gig of RAM machine, right? So this is basically asking you, hey, we noticed you'd like to take advantage of pooled desktops. We'll maintain a minimum of 1 server and no more of 1 server at 8-core 64 gigs. Per machine, right? So can 50 users fit in one 8-core 64 gig of machine? Probably not, right? So what we're going to do down here is, we're going to actually adjust this user to core ratio option, and we'll use Microsoft's recommendation of maybe professional worker or perhaps even a custom worker, which is 2 users per vCPU core. So that's how Nerdio helps you estimate the size of your session host based on this user to core ratio function here, right? So once I switch this from task worker to 2 users per vCPU core ratio, you'll notice that this number changed from 1 to 3, right? So it's basically, we'll maintain a minimum of 1 machine of 8-core 64 gigs that'll be on all the time, and no more than 3 for, let's say, 50 hours of work week, right? So let's say the customer works 50 hours of work week. Nerdio has technology that says at any given time, we'll have 1 machine that's 8-core 64 gigs on for you, but only when needed, only during the 50 hours a week, we'll spin up 2 more machines and give you a total of 3 machines at 8-core 64 gigs of RAM each, right? So Nerdio can auto scale your environment in and out based on what your CPU usage is for the specific client, and this will give you those estimates all in this price quote calculator here. All right, so we have to talk about bandwidth, right? So bandwidth using WVD is about $1.50 per user per month. So we already know that. You're just calculating for the pixels that are going in and out of the data center. All right, you have storage operations cost for non-premium disks at 3 cents per gig. We just talked about the user core ratio. If you're using GPUs, you can specify the user to core ratio for GPUs here, which is grayed out because we don't have any GPUs. And then we have your personal desktop size, right? Remember those 2 partners that require personal desktops that we specified? Let's actually give them, 4-core 16 gig of RAM machines, right? Dedicated to them. And then over here, we enter in our CSP discounts. So let's say we got 12% off of Azure, 16% off of Office 365, and let's say, 13% off of your reserve instances from your distributor, right? So it's going to calculate that percentage discount into this. You pick your region. So let's pick US East, for example. And then click View Cost. And it's going to give you a cost per user for this entire infrastructure, right? So the $50 per user per month consists of Azure costs at $1,050, Microsoft 365 costs at $840. Windows 10 licenses is included in that Microsoft 365, so we ignore that. We have your Nerdio cost at $12 per seat. At 50 seats is $600. You have your $2,490 per month divided by 50 gives you $50 per user per month. All right, so $50 per user per month is going to give you a domain controller of 2-core 8 gigs of RAM, a file server of 4-core 16 gigs of RAM with a 1 terabyte data disk, an application with ProLaw with a 512 gig data disk with 4-core 16, and you have your 2 personal desktops for those 2 partners, again at 4-core 16 gigs of RAM, and then you have 3 pooled servers, right? So 3 Windows Virtual Desktop pooled session hosts at 8-core 64 gigs of RAM each to support your 48 other pooled users. Right, so that's how you kind of use a calculator, and here's a further breakdown of how we got to that 1050 based on different categories. Right, so with this information, you can easily go and figure out your sell price, right? Because now with confidence, we're telling you that with everything all in included, you're looking at $50 per user per month, which tells me if I open up a calculator, let's say I want to sell this and make 60% margin, all I have to do is do 50 times 1.6 and sell it at $80, right? And you'll make 60% margin on selling Windows Virtual Desktop with all their customers' infrastructure running in Azure. So that's really what I wanted to show you today, right? This tool is going to help you calculate the cost of running workloads in Azure with ease and with confidence. So with that, I'll bring it back to Andrea for any questions that might have come up.
Thank you, Tony, and great presentation. This was actually a great demo. So if everyone has any questions, please feel free to take yourselves off mute. I'm looking in the chat box right now, so I don't see any questions. So
yeah, I know you might have. This is Alim here. You might have answered this question. Is this recording available for us?
I'm sorry, is this what?
Recording.
Oh, yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, the recording will be available on the Microsoft Partner Community after the call. Once this is available, I will drop the link in the chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So does everybody kind of see how this can help calculate with confidence a price of Azure so you can go and confidently sell this? I think that this answers a lot of the questions that we get from most MSPs around pricing, right? And most managed service providers will go and sell this. Let's say you were including all managed services. Let's say you were selling a IT as a service environment with everything here included and wrapping in your own managed services. Most MSPs will sell this somewhere between $180 USD to about $250 USD per user per month, depending on what other services you bundle into the solution. So that's just to give you an idea of what other MSPs are selling this for. Any other questions?
No, that's great info. Thank you very much.
Yep.
There are no questions under the event post also, so that's good.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining.
Okay, thank you everyone. Have a great rest of the day or evening, and we are happy to welcome you next week for the final and fourth episode. Thank you.
Thank you.